or may not carry illegal drugs in his backpack. But last fall, he wrote a letter to the Stanford Daily saying that he did. It was, he said, a protest of Stanford's new drug policy. When that failed to trigger a response from Stanford, Regis wrote a similar letter to drug czar Bob Martinez, again stating that he carried illegal drugs in his backpack. That, he says, got him fired.
What I've been most concerned about is that it seems that in order to win the war on drugs, the government is willing to throw out the Bill of Rights. They're willing to do whatever it takes to win the war on drugs. The police can't even get a search warrant for what I've done. Yet Stanford is going to fire me on evidence that wouldn't hold up in court.
It's as much a moral issue for me as anything else.
Stanford engineering dean James Gibbons denied the case raises free speech or privacy issues.
It isn't a question for me of what the criminal law of the United States might be and how far we might go beyond that in designing the rules that we think are necessary for this community.
Stanford says Regis was fired both for saying he carried illegal drugs and for buying alcohol for underage students. Stanford may be particularly sensitive right now. The university recently returned to the federal government about $1 million in payments for research fees after complaints Stanford overcharged the government. Students here had mixed feelings about the dismissal of the young teacher, who was recently voted one of the top 12 by students.
Well, I think it's absolutely crazy that he was even allowed to stay on as long as he was here.
Unfortunately, because of the situation that Stanford is in with the indirect research and the funding, I think that they've been forced to go ahead and fire Stuart Regis, which they probably would have done anyway, but that it's been a very unproductive move for Stuart Regis.
Stanford,
who opposes the government's war on drugs, was preparing to clear out and possibly to sue. Stanford fired instructor Stuart Regis last week after he expressed his opinion in provocative fashion. But Stanford officials say they did not fire him to restrict his freedom of speech or because some not too subtle pressure from the federal government. Lloyd DeCuesta has a report.
Stuart Regis packed his backpack with papers today, the same backpack he claims he carries illegal drugs in. Regis lost his computer science teaching job last week because of what he says he carries in the backpack, and because he held an off-campus dinner for students where 2 underage students bought alcoholic drinks.
It's completely out of proportion to fire me when freshman dorms have alcohol at their parties here at Stanford.
Regis says he will not violate the alcohol prohibition again, but as for carrying drugs in his backpack, he says no one has proven he is doing that.
I've been fired just for talking. I mean, as far as anybody knows, I never did carry anything in my backpack. All they know is I've talked about it. And if the war on drugs has gone so far that someone can be fired for talking about what they've done, it's a point worth making.
While Stanford has fired Regis, the campus police say it has no case against him. Police say they would need probable cause and a search warrant to find out if he is carrying illegal drugs.
What about the situation where he says, I am carrying drugs in my backpack?
Well, it's like a person saying that they speed. You know, unless you catch them speeding, they haven't really committed any crime.
It isn't a question for me of what the criminal law of the United States might be and how far we might go beyond that in designing the rules that we think are necessary for this community to operate in the way that we have to operate.
School of Engineering Dean James Gibbons is the man who terminated Regis.
Violating the drug policy of the university is not a free speech issue. It's a professional misconduct issue, and those are the grounds on which we made our decision.
All of this became an issue after Regis wrote this letter to federal drug czar Bob Martinez, saying he was carrying drugs on campus. Regis wrote, quote, I disagree with the government's anti-drug campaign, and I'm doing everything I can to make fools of you. In response, Martinez wrote to Stanford authorities, reminding them that the government can cut off funding to schools that don't follow federal anti-drug policies.
The question here is who's going to enforce drug laws in this country? The police can't touch me, yet I've been punished. Who punished me? Stanford University. And why did they do it? Because the government forced them to do it. What we're doing here is we are making universities join the drug police. We're making universities enforcers of this law. And that's inappropriate.
Regis is filing a grievance over his termination, and if that fails, he says he'll probably sue the university. Tomorrow is Stuart Regis' last official day here on the Stanford campus. He's invited supporters to join him for lunch here at White Plaza. He says there'll be no breaking of laws, but a way to get some final words in. All of this in preparation for his next job. He's writing a book about his experiences. At Stanford University, Lloyd DeCuesta for the 10 o'clock news.